Hey guys, Pater Franson here from christiangeekcentral.com and Spirit Blade Productions, here to give you some thoughts on Pathfinder, the adventure card game, the new core set that has just come out featuring the storyline Dragon's Demand. Now, if you've not played the Pathfinder adventure card game before, which has come out in numerous core sets, each of which is added onto by buying new kind of like scenario expansions that ultimately tell a much longer story. So there's been tons of stuff for this game series in the past. If you've never played any of that, I'll try to give it to you in a nutshell what this is, and then talk about the changes and just what I think of this new core set as they updated the rules. It's basically a deck building game that is adapting paper and pencil RPG mechanics into a light, much shorter experience without any of the role play. So you're not talking, to each other in character and doing that kind of stuff. But other than that, they really try to represent all of the typical mechanics that you would find in a paper and pencil fantasy RPG game. Characters have dice-based stats, so like a D4 for, an intelligence is not going to be a great stat, but a D12 or something like that is going to be much better. So they have dice stats representing strengths and weaknesses, along with just kind of static enhancing powers that can help you with your skill checks and combat checks. The character's deck, each character's deck represents their health, because if it runs out, your character's dead. It also represents their equipment and their resources in general, like spells, armor, weapons, potions, etc. All that kind of stuff is represented by your deck. And so you have a hand size that you are cycling through every turn. Cards are either displayed to be used or placed under the draw pile so you can get access to them later on to be used. Sometimes cards are discarded or removed from the game until the game is over, or just returned to the box and you may never get access to that card ever again. So depending on what you do with your cards, you might get more powerful effects. And those mechanics also represent thematically what's going on. For example, you might only have to show a sword card in order to take advantage of its benefits in a combat check, but if you have a potion card, you're likely going to have to just get rid of it and put it back in the box, and you might never see it again after you've downed it, Your deck is cycled through multiple times in the game, in a single game session, and it's modified between game sessions based on new cards that you are acquiring as you play a game session, and you use those at the end of a session to upgrade your character before taking that new modified deck representing your character into the next game. And other statistic bonuses can eventually be purchased as well. So that looting and level up experience, I think, is mimicked wonderfully in this series of games and also in the new core set. Turns involve visiting location decks. There are decks on the table that represent different locations that you're going to, dungeons or temples or towns and bridges and forests and all these kinds of things. Each will have its own card, and it will have a different loadout of card types in it that thematically represent what you would expect to find. So if you go to an apothecary, you're going to be much more likely to find items and maybe potions, hopefully, in the mix. Or if you're going to go to a library, you're going to be more likely to maybe find spells there that your wizard can acquire through skill checks. So whether you're encountering something bad or something good, you're making a skill check to defeat it or to acquire it as you make your way drawing cards as you explore these different locations. The rules simulate combat, disarming traps, and even using charisma to persuade or intimidate NPCs that you come across in various situations. Mechanically, you're kind of pushing your luck and doing resource management with your deck. You're asking the question, okay, I've got this card and I can just display it to use it for this level of its ability, but I can really get like the equivalent of a critical hit if I'm willing to discard it or put it under my deck or get rid of it until the game session is over, And so it's a nice marriage of mechanics to theme, and thematically you're going through the same, I think, range of experiences that you would have in most Dungeons and Dragons games, but again, through mechanics only and not roleplay. This is a fully cooperative game, and it can also be played solo. I've done an ongoing campaign of the one of the previous sets with a friend for years, and I'm going through another set now, solo, really enjoying myself in both of those kind of adventure campaigns, or whatever you call them, adventure paths, I guess they call them, instead of campaigns. And with the new core set, I've played 2 games solo, running 2 characters each time. So arguably, I've had the equivalent experience of maybe 4 games just playing as 1 character each time, but I don't want to make too much of that. This should really be seen as just a first impressions kind of review. I haven't seen much in the way of video reviews for the new core set, and that's probably because there's a lot to consider about this game. They have new difficulty options that you can use that change the amount of cards that you have to get through in order to completely explore a location, making the game shorter or easier, so there's nice modification options to fit your difficulty and play style. And I wouldn't possibly have time or interest in playing through all the different permutations of rules for this game to give you an idea of what I think of all of it. The Pathfinder Adventure card game core set is a reworking of the rules from previous sets, largely just changing like the vocab that's used and altering a few elements of turn sequences here and there. This was apparently done, as I looked at some of the dev blog diaries or whatever, apparently done to free up card space and otherwise streamline the game, but I'm not sure that I felt the benefits of that yet. I do recommend that experienced players who have played previous Pathfinder Adventure card game sets skip the abbreviated Quick Start game that's included here to, I think, get new players accustomed to the basic structure of this game. You're going to have to play that scenario over again, kind of for reals. The Quick Start is an abbreviated version of that, and it doesn't count. It doesn't count as completing that first scenario. You're just going to have to do it again anyway. So, and I also found that the setup for the Quick Start scenario was just a tough way to figure out which rules were new and which were just unique to this abbreviated version of the first scenario they're trying to present to you. So I think it's better for experienced PACG players to just skim the whole rulebook really quick and then just start playing, looking things up in the really handy glossary provided as needed. By my second full game, I was flying through turns with familiarity and comfort developed from my previous sessions of the original rule sets that absolutely carried over into this experience. Scenario objectives are much more varied than the usual find the big boss and kill him, or close all locations and get them fully explored and done with, But the moment-to-moment gameplay feels largely the same. It's just a matter of remembering what are the alternate win conditions, this session. The flavor text has been removed from location cards, and the trade-off is that now there's a booklet that has some text that you read, some flavor text that sets up the story of each scenario as kind of like this introduction to it, and then they've added a new development section to read as a sort of epilogue for each scenario that you play. I'm not sure if that trade-off is really working for me or not. I don't play games, video games or tabletop games, for gameplay. Even when I'm playing a Dungeons & Dragons like True Blue RPG, I'm there more for like what I can do to manipulate and mess around in the world, rather than like being interested in the ongoing story itself. If anything, I liked having text on location cards. My friend and I would break up our gameplay experience now and then by reading the location text for each location before we explored it for the first time. And so I'm not sure that front-loading and back-loading is an improvement as far as where they're putting the flavor text, though it does make it a little bit more of a story this time around. Locations still remain really ununified in theme regarding the contents, So the rules booklet simply encourages players to sort of accept abstractions, like finding an alligator that is in the top of a desert tower. You'd say, what in the world is an alligator doing here? This doesn't make any sense. The rulebook says, encourages you just accept these abstractions and make them a part of the story, in your own mind. Let the cards determine what the story is instead of bringing your preconceived notions in. And, yes, you can do that, but I think it would have been nice to have optional rules that treated like the initial card types that appear in locations as you explore them as sort of proxies, so that if you do find an alligator, maybe if you're in, exploring an undead mansion or something and you find an alligator, maybe there's a rule in the opening text of the scenario that says, when encountering an enemy, if it does not have the undead trait, banish it and summon a monster with the undead trait. That would add a little bit of work for players, but those who I think want unified location themes in terms of their contents would, I think, appreciate that, at least having that option. Sure, you can house rule that. That sounds pretty simple, what I just said, but is the game balanced for that to work and to provide the right challenge? Are there the right difficulty, strength level, and thematic type of enemies to do that kind of thing? I kind of doubt that. The final scenario provides rules for random scenario creation, as though the local champions, after saving the day, kind of stick around to continue doing missions for the town. And the options really change up the objectives and the scenario structure to match, a new theme. There's a theme about chasing someone through multiple locations, that you're forced to explore locations sequentially, as though you're following them strictly from one area to the next, not choosing, which locations you want to go to. There's one where it simulates a siege, where you're basically stuck at one location and having to fend off, baddies and stuff. But without encounter decks that contents that also match the theme of the scenario in terms of what specifically you find as you're going through these scenarios, I'm not sure I'm going to be motivated to keep track of all the mechanical changes just to try and simulate a different plot concept in a game that I don't play for story anyway. I mean, is it really going to feel like a chase, quote unquote, just because I'm forced to essentially explore this list of locations in a specific order? I don't know that the payoff's really going to be worth it for having a totally different setup and objectives, for the game that I have to keep track of. I might have preferred if they simply added in a few cards that now and then would just kind of stop the game and deliver some story text, and introduce some kind of effect or choice for players to deal with. All the monkeying with the rules and objectives feels a little unnecessary for what I come to these games to experience. I'm the kind of player that liked Descent First Edition, and that it was just about crawling dungeons, exploring, finding treasure, and fighting a big boss at the end. I don't mind doing that formula again and again and again. Second edition for Descent tried to vary things up with alternate objectives, and it lost in the process, I think, some elements that I play dungeon crawlers for, and I've quickly lost interest in Descent second edition. Now, Pathfinder Adventure Card Game Core Set isn't changing things up enough, I don't think, to have that same effect on me. But neither do I think that the changes are going to make for an experience that I'm going to enjoy really any more than the classic rules. The set is fully compatible with older sets. With just a few guidelines, you can play old sets with the new rules, or you can bring cards from the old sets into the core set experience. This is hugely appreciated by me, and I do have some motive for bringing old cards to this new core set experience, namely for the art. Some of the art has been redone, but much of it is recycled, which is fine by me. I liked the art, and I don't mind seeing it again, except the new layout zooms in on the art more very often, cutting off peripheral details. Some cards are more affected than others, but a number of monsters are arguably featured as mere headshots compared to the more full display of their bodies in previous sets. And heroes really get the short stick. Character cards feature almost nothing more than heads, and the only full-body portraits, showcasing equipment and weapons and the full character design, are those on the tiny character stand-ups that replace the portrait cards used to signify which locations characters are at. Finally, the art on these cards is also generally darker than in previous sets. Maybe that's just like a glitch in the set that I got. I know that other people are experiencing different kind of problems with the printing that I didn't experience with mine, like problems, weird things going on with the card backings and stuff. I didn't have that problem, but the art I noticed is generally darker. Even the returning art is noticeably darker, making details harder to see. And in at least a couple cases, the image is so dark I wouldn't know what I was supposed to be looking at if the card name didn't tell me. Now, is this still the Pathfinder adventure card game that I've enjoyed so much in previous sets? For the most part, yes. And even the artwork differences didn't take away from the bulk of my moment-to-moment experience. Additionally, I wasn't crazy about most of the themes of the previous core sets after the original Rise of the Runelords set, so I appreciated that this set gets back to D&D style basics. We're just mercenaries helping out a town, and it's all going to culminate in a big dragon fight. Yeah, that's cool. I'm on board. On top of that, this base set is definitely less expensive with more gameplay included compared to what you'd pay now to get Rise of the Runelords core set. Maybe it's comparable in price to what the other sets would cost right now, but I still think with the added rules for like random scenario generation, you've got more play value out of this, and I think more variety in cards as well. Then again, if the themes and pricing of other previous core sets look more appealing than this one to you, and you haven't played Pathfinder the Adventure card game yet, you might enjoy getting one of those instead with a mummy theme or a pirates theme or, something like that. The gameplay is not radically different at all. In the end, I'm glad I picked this one up, and it's going to be waiting for me on my shelf. I'm going to be glad to see it there, knowing I'm going to get around to it. But I'm also having a blast right now playing Pathfinder, the adventure card game, Mummy's Mask, which I've only just started, and I imagine I'm going to play all the way through that and finish it out before continuing with the new core set. As for themes that might stimulate worthwhile moral, philosophical, or spiritual contemplation, I've read through the entire story included in the core set and don't think it has any spiritual or moral themes likely to stand out, especially to people that are already, into fantasy and fantasy movies and games and stuff like that. But if you have some reservations about the fantasy genre itself or about playing characters that do immoral things now and then you're invited to check out a video I've created on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/christiangeekcentral titled "Can Christians Be Evil in Games?" Which aims to answer that question from a biblical perspective. Then I hope you'll join us soon over at christiangeekcentral.com as we continue to geek out and seek the truth. Thanks. Bye-bye. I've created some new tiers for our Patreon. On top of many of our original perks, I've added Discord live events, spoiler chat videos, and more. You can get all the info at patreon.com/spiritbladeproductions.